Thanks, Tom, for inviting me, and thanks 1990 Institute to invite me to speak here. It is my pleasure. And I think what the 1990 Institute is doing is great to foster better understanding between U.S. and China. And it's very important. We know China is going through dramatic changes, and it's very important to prepare our students, for a future which is very different from the, future of their parents. Well, just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm original from China, and I came to this country in 1989 as a student. And after finishing my master's study at Stanford, I worked in Silicon Valley doing some consulting work and also as an entrepreneur. So in 2004, 2005, I was a fellow at Stanford. And then at that time, I traveled back to China a lot doing the field work. And I see so many dramatic changes happen in China. And in the meantime, I see increasing fear in the West. And a lot of fear is really unrealistic because lack of understanding of what's going on there. And so as a Chinese native and American citizen, I feel compelled to bridge the difference in understanding between US and China. So I wrote this book, The Chinese Dream, The Rise of the World's Largest Middle Class and What It Means to You. So today I'm basically going to talk about the Chinese middle class and how it has changed and will continue to change the world we live in and how we can prepare our students for that changes. And before I get started, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you knows that the Chinese middle class is already larger than the entire population of the United States? Oh, great. You guys are very informed. Well, because China's tremendous economic growth in the last 15 or last 20 years, actually a new breed of Chinese middle class emerged just in last 15, 20 years. And these are more like urban dwellers and the people who benefited tremendously from this economic growth. And last year, the Chinese middle class almost approached 500 million. And by 2025, it will reach 800 million. That's why I said the rise of the China's middle class is the biggest story of our time. It has changed, it will continue to change the world we live in, how we do our business and what the impact we have. Well, people often ask me, how do I define the Chinese middle class? Basically, I define from economic term. First, I define the Chinese middle class as households that has income between 10,000 to 60,000 US dollars annual income. And these people mostly college educated and have relatively stable jobs. And most of them are concentrated in large cities. So rural China is a totally different story. But again, this number can be misleading because cost of living in China is very different from the cost of living in the US. And even within China, cost of living in Beijing, Shanghai, and it's very different from those in smaller cities. So very important criteria is the last one. The rule of thumb is a household with a third of its income for discretionary spending. Those people are qualified as a middle class. And as I said, I traveled all over China, spoke to people from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, office workers, rural migrants. Basically, they are falling into this category. Now, I'd like to tell you a story about one of the person I met, just give you an idea what's like to be middle class in China. I know Tom said the Chinese dream is not like an American dream. Well, the Xi Jinping's version of Chinese dream is to revive China to a stronger nation. But when I spoke to average Chinese, their dreams are, very much the same with the dream we have to have a better life. So I think something about American dream are very universal. And I met this young man, his name is Yifan, and he's from a very, very poor village, somewhere very remote. And he grew up so poor that he never had a, clothes that's not not patched. And he told me his family was so poor that he couldn't even afford $1 tuition fee to go to school. But as a child, he helped his parents labor in the field. And he worked in the field. He always looked at high mountains surrounding the village and wondered what was beyond those mountains. So at age 18, he left the village, headed about 1,000 miles south to Guangdong province. And first, he worked in a factory making about $36 a month, which is a lot of money for him. And then he found another job as waiter in a restaurant, making a little bit more money. And from there, he moved on, worked his way up to become a general manager of the whole restaurant chain. I don't know, the Chinese restaurant can be huge, like hundreds of tables. So he supervised hundreds of people. And at that time, he was making 10,000 yuan, which is 1,200 US dollars. It's very good money for him. Then he moved on to become an entrepreneur, and he partnered with a friend to start a company basically trading cell phones. And within 2 years, he made a fortune from that business. So he bought a home in Guangzhou, it's a big city, and then he also bought a car for his brother, help him to become a taxi driver in the city. Then he started 2 restaurants, which he handed over to his sister and his brother-in-law to run the restaurant, so they both could have a job in the city. Basically, he brought his whole family from impoverished rural village to a booming city, which has a lot of opportunities. And he did all of that before he was 25. But what struck me the most is Yifan did not complain any hardship in his life. He told me that I'm glad I was born poor because that made me work very hard, and I would never stop until I reach my goals. And now Yifan, sold his business. He wanted to devote his life to education, partly because he missed out a good education as a child. So he invested some money in an English language school, and he became a manager, ran a branch of that school. And he told me his dream is to come to America someday to study for an MBA. And when he gets older, he want to go back to the rural village to teach those kids. So now Yifan's story should sound familiar. The Chinese dream is like the American dream, the can-do spirit, the optimism and determination to achieve a better life. And I spoke to many people. Some are moving up, some are being left behind. But I met many people like Yifan. So in their stories, we see ourselves, our daily struggles, our hope and dream, above all, our spirit that carry us through both good and bad times. Now that you have an idea about what's like to be middle class in China, and I'd like to discuss the implication of the rising Chinese middle class. I know some of my fellow panelists already discussed the implication on environment. There are many other implications, political implications, social implications, but today I would like to focus on economic implication. Well, one of the biggest implications is China is going to consume a lot more. A recent study, this chart is from Morgan Stanley study, and see China will overtake the U.S. to become the largest retail market. And you can see the retail market in Northern America and Western Europe is kind of flat and sluggish, but China is rising, leading the way. And that, of course, has a lot of implication for the business, also for prepare the next generation to compete in that area. And part of this consumerism is driven by urbanization, which Mark already talked about. And by 2025, nearly 1 billion people will live in the city. And over 200 Chinese cities have 1 million residents. So in this transition, government is also push the consumer-led growth because Chinese government realized they cannot really depend on continued export. Because during the recession we have, China was the first to hurt, and 20 million people was laid off because there's no demand in the West. So they want to encourage domestic consumption and to lead the China's continued economic growth. Now, a word of consumption. Now let's talk about another things about China's soon to be largest importer. We all know China is biggest exporter. It's export goods to U.S., to the rest of the world. But because of rising Chinese middle class, that dynamic is changing very fast. You look at this. 10 years ago, China imported very little. But last year, China already catch up quickly. And the economists predict China will become the largest importer next year, 2014. Now look at this picture. It's very familiar, okay, between the U.S. and China trade. Last year, U.S., although U.S. export to China grew twice as fast as its import, but it's still U.S. export very little to China. And China, but import a lot from China. What does that mean? That means really probably U.S. are missing the opportunities. And many U.S. export to China is in power generation, industrial materials, and in aircraft, medical equipment. But I think the biggest opportunity is in consumer sector. Consumer market. For example, on November 11 last year, China's single-day shopping festival online sale reached 4 billion, and which is more than U.S. total sale in the U.S. Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined. So there's a huge potential for U.S. company to sell into China now. And I want to say a word about consumerism. In this country, we all know all the evils of a consumer, excessive materialism and consumerism, and because we are on top of that. But in China, consumerism is really new in the last 5 to 10 years, the most. And to them, a lot of Chinese, they see it as a sign of a better life, a sign you are getting ahead, a sign, as Tom said, you are equal with those advanced economy, and you are not being looked up, down upon. That's why there are so many, luxury goods consumption in China. So that's something to keep in mind. And good news is Chinese love American goods, and many Chinese are willing to pay premium price for the goods that is made in USA rather than in China. And another thing I really want to touch upon is the huge potential and opportunities in e-commerce market. China is already has 500 million internet users. Okay, e-commerce in China generated almost 200 billion last year, and by 2020, online sales could reach 650 billion. So again, there is a huge potential. That's why I said the rise of China's middle class is the biggest story of our time, and how important it is to prepare the next generation to compete in that market. And I think now is a good time to talk about the eBay Alibaba story. And how many of you heard Jack Ma? Good. And this story is not just illustrate how companies succeed or fail in China. It's really, again, coming back to how to compete effectively in this globalized economy. Well, the Jack Ma is the founder of the Alibaba Group, right? And he started this company in 1999 as an e-commerce company to help a small, medium-sized company to access online market. And as 2002, eBay entered China, basically want to, conquer the China market. But Alibaba, Jack Ma decided to compete with eBay. At that time, people think, he's crazy, right? Because eBay is a global giant, but Alibaba was a very small company at that time, and nobody in the West have heard of it. And even Jack Ma's team did not think they were not convinced they could compete with eBay. So what Jack Ma did was ask all his management team to stand upside down on their heads. Basically, you do a yoga pose on their heads. And everybody complains, no, I cannot do that. I've never done that. And, I'm too old to do that. But Jack Ma said, you must do it. I'm the oldest one in this room, and I will do it. So he made all of them one by one to stand on their heads. And after that exercise, Jack Ma said, when you stand upside down, you look at the world from totally new perspective. Well, eBay may be famous in the US, but in China, if you ask 100 people, probably 10 people heard of eBay, but 90% people know Alibaba. He said, I think we have a chance. So 2 years later, eBay was completely defeated by Alibaba and retreated from China market, now which has 500 million internet users. So how eBay failed will be classic story taught in the business schools. But what Jack Ma's the success has taught us a very important lesson is that when you look at the world upside down, and you can see the world from a totally new perspective, and you can have the best way when you know the both way, best of the both worlds when you know the both way. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. To summarize, the rise of China's middle class is the biggest story of our time. It has changed, will continue to change the world we live in, and has many, many opportunities as well as challenges. Now, I'd like to leave you with a final thought, or maybe final question. How are we going to embrace those challenges or changes and to prepare ourselves and our students to compete in this globalized economy?